My name is Karim. I am 34 years old and live in the glass and steel heart of Dubai. For over a decade, I've worked as a lead software engineer, building the complex digital backbones of companies that most people use every day. My life has always been defined by logic, code, and the belief that if you work hard enough, you can build a fortress that no one can tear down. I wasn't born into wealth. Every dirham I've ever earned was the result of 16-hour days, sleepless nights, and the kind of mental exhaustion that makes your bones ache. But I never minded the grind. Why? Because I had what I believed was the perfect reward waiting for me at home. My wife, Sarah, was my anchor. We met when I was just a junior developer with nothing but a beat-up laptop and a dream. She stayed by my side through the lean years, or at least that's the story I told myself. As my career skyrocketed, I made it my mission to ensure she never had to lift a finger. I bought her the designer bags, the luxury SUV, and the penthouse overlooking the marina. To me, Sarah wasn't just my wife, she was my greatest investment, the person I trusted with my very soul. Our life was a curated masterpiece of stability. We were the couple people looked at with envy during weekend brunches. I thought I had built a life so secure, so rooted in mutual respect that nothing could ever break it. I was a man of systems, and I thought my family system was impenetrable. I was happy, I was proud, and most of all, I was dangerously oblivious to the rot growing just beneath the surface of my perfect world.
In my profession, we have a term for the small, almost imperceptible errors that eventually lead to a total system failure. We call them bugs. A single misplaced semicolon can bring down a multi-million-dollar platform if it's left unchecked. The first bug in my marriage appeared on a mundane Tuesday evening, and, like a fool, I tried to patch it with excuses instead of investigating the source. I was sitting in my home office, finishing a security audit for our penthouse's smart home system. It's a habit of mine, checking the logs, ensuring the firmware is updated, keeping our digital fortress secure. As I scrolled through the entry logs for the front door, I noticed a guest code had been used at 2:14 p.m. the previous day. I was at a high-stakes board meeting in the Dubai International Financial Center at that time. The code belonged to Mark, my business partner, and the man I'd trusted since our university days. Later that night, as Sarah was applying her expensive night cream in the glow of the vanity mirror, I mentioned it casually. "Did Mark grab those project blueprints from my study yesterday? I saw his code on the door lock." Sarah didn't even flinch. Her reflection met mine in the mirror, her expression as calm as a still lake. "Oh yes," she said, her voice light and melodic. "He called saying you needed them urgently for the Abu Dhabi meeting. He was only here for 5 minutes. Why, is there a problem with the log?" "No," I replied, forcing a smile. "Just checking the system." Her explanation was perfectly logical. It was seamless, but a cold, nagging sensation settled in the pit of my stomach. Mark had told me that same Monday morning he was trapped in Abu Dhabi all day and wouldn't be back until late. Why would he drive 2 hours back to Dubai for prints he could have accessed digitally? It was a tiny discrepancy, a rounding error in the massive equation of our lives. I pushed the thought away, telling myself I was just tired, letting my professional paranoia bleed into my personal life. But the logic didn't scan. For the first time in 10 years, the data of my life didn't quite add up.
The discrepancy haunted me. It was like a dead pixel on a 4K screen. Once you see it, you can't look at anything else. 2 days later, over a breakfast of organic fruit and espresso overlooking the hazy Dubai skyline, I decided to run a stress test on the truth. "I grabbed lunch with Mark yesterday," I lied, keeping my eyes fixed on my tablet. He mentioned he was stuck in Abu Dhabi until nearly midnight on Monday. It's strange, I could have sworn you said he stopped by here in the afternoon. The clink of Sarah's silver spoon against her porcelain bowl stopped instantly. The silence lasted a heartbeat too long. When she finally spoke, her voice wasn't defensive, it was pitying. "Karim," she sighed, putting down the spoon and looking at me with eyes full of artificial concern. "Are you feeling all right? I never said Mark came by on Monday. I said he came by last Thursday. You're doing that thing again, the work brain. You're so buried in your code and your security audits that you're starting to hallucinate problems where they don't exist." I blinked, momentarily stunned. "No, Sarah, I remember the conversation. You said—" "I know what I said, honey." She reached across the table to squeeze my hand. Her touch felt like ice. "You've been under so much pressure with the new software launch. You're becoming paranoid. It's actually starting to scare me a little. First, you're obsessing over door logs, and now you're twisting my words. Maybe you should see someone, a therapist, or at least take a leave of absence." She said it with such conviction, such gentle love, that for a split second I actually doubted my own memory. She wasn't just lying, she was rewriting the script of our reality. She used my greatest strength, my attention to detail, and reframed it as a mental breakdown. As I sat there, she began to list other mistakes I'd supposedly made recently, small things I couldn't disprove. By the time I left for the office, my head was spinning. I felt like I was walking on a floor that was tilting at a 5-degree angle, just enough to keep me off balance, just enough to make me doubt the very ground I stood on.
In my world, data is the only thing that doesn't have an agenda. People lie, memories fade, and perceptions can be manipulated, but a timestamp is absolute. Sarah wanted me to believe I was losing my mind, but as a lead software engineer, I knew how to find the source code of a lie. I stopped arguing with her. I stopped questioning her words. Instead, I started watching the data. I began with our shared cloud accounts. Sarah wasn't tech-savvy. She used the same password for her iCloud as she did for her favorite online boutique. Within an hour, I was looking at her location history. For the last 3 months, every time I was late at the office, her phone wasn't at the Pilates studio or the mall. It was parked at a private villa in Jumeirah, a quiet, upscale neighborhood far from her usual social circles. Next, I turned to the financials. I didn't look at the big numbers. I looked at the microtransactions. I found recurring payments to a high-end flower delivery service, but I had never seen a single rose in our penthouse that I hadn't bought myself. Even more damning were the Uber logs. She was taking guest rides, trips booked by another account, to that same villa in Jumeirah. The tension was suffocating. Every time she kissed me goodnight or asked how my day was, I felt a surge of nausea. I was living with a stranger who was actively trying to convince me I was mentally ill to cover her tracks. I decided to escalate. I didn't do anything as clunky as a private investigator. Instead, I gifted her a new set of high-end wireless headphones she'd been eyeing. Inside the charging case, I had soldered a microscopic GPS tracker and a high-gain microphone tied to a private server I'd built. I was no longer just a husband. I was a hunter. I spent my nights in my study, ostensibly working on the new launch, while actually monitoring a live feed of her movements. I was looking for the bug that was destroying my life, and I was terrified of what I would find when I finally ran the search. For 3 days, the audio feed from the hidden microphone yielded nothing but the mundane sounds of Sarah's life. The clink of silverware at lunch, her humming along to the radio, and brief professional calls with her personal assistant. I began to feel a gnawing sense of shame. Maybe Sarah was right. Maybe the work brain was finally short-circuiting my sanity.
On Friday afternoon, the GPS tracked her to a secluded, high-end cafe in the Al-Fahidi district. I sat in my car 2 blocks away, heart hammering, listening through my headphones. I heard a man's voice, but it wasn't Mark's. It was an older man, formal and precise. "The paperwork is nearly complete, Sarah," the man said. "It's a significant investment, but it will secure your future for decades. Does Karim suspect?" "He's been a little paranoid lately," Sarah replied, her voice soft. "But he thinks I'm planning a surprise for our anniversary. He has no idea I'm actually looking at these offshore properties." I nearly dropped my phone. Offshore properties? My mind raced. Was she building a nest egg for us? Was this her way of handling our long-term security because I was always too busy? A wave of intense relief washed over me, followed by a crushing weight of guilt. I had been tracking my wife like a criminal, while she was trying to secure our retirement. I felt like the lowest man on earth. I drove home, determined to delete the tracking software and apologize for my distance. I even stopped to buy her favorite peonies. When I entered the penthouse, I found her in the kitchen. I hugged her tighter than I had in months. "I'm sorry I've been so stressed, Sarah. I love you." She smiled, that same perfect, tranquil smile. "I told you, honey, you just need to trust me." That night, while Sarah showered, I went to her bedside table to plug in her phone, a final act of the new trusting Karim. A notification popped up from an unsaved number. It was a photo. I clicked it, expecting a picture of a house or a sunset. Instead, it was a screenshot of my own bank's private internal memo, the one regarding my upcoming $10 million stock liquidation. Below it, a message from the older man from the cafe. "The offshore accounts are ready to receive the wire. Once the accident happens, the transfer will be untraceable. Mark is ready on his end." The peonies in the vase on the counter seemed to lose their color. The investment wasn't a house, it was my life's work, and I wasn't part of the future they were securing. The accident happened 48 hours later. It was a surgical strike, a glitch in my SUV's braking system that I now know was no glitch at all. I survived only because I'd spent my life obsessing over safety protocols. I walked away with a severe concussion and chemical burns that required my eyes to be bandaged for a week. The doctors said my vision would likely return, but I told Sarah and the police a different story. I told them I saw nothing but darkness. I wanted to see what people would do when they thought the lion was blind. Coming home was like entering a house of ghosts. I sat in my favorite armchair in the living room, my eyes shrouded in heavy medical gauze, listening to the world around me. And then it happened. The front door opened. I recognized the heavy, confident stride. It was Mark. Time slowed down to a rhythmic, agonizing crawl. I could hear my own pulse thumping in my ears, a frantic drumbeat in the silence. My heart didn't just break. It shattered into 10 million jagged pieces of glass, each one slicing through my chest. Through a microscopic gap in the lower edge of my bandages, a gap I had meticulously adjusted in the hospital bathroom, I saw them. They didn't even wait for me to sleep. Sarah walked straight into Mark's arms right in front of me. She didn't look like the grieving, worried wife she'd played at the hospital. She was radiant. She was laughing. Mark reached out and ran his hand through her hair, the same hand that had shaken mine 1,000 times in friendship. "How long do we have to play this game?" Mark whispered, his voice dripping with a casual cruelty that made my skin crawl. "Not long," Sarah replied, her voice as smooth as silk. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small vial, the medication the hospital had given me for the pain. She swapped it with another identical vial she had hidden in the kitchen. The accidental overdose will happen within 48 hours. The doctors will blame the trauma of the crash. Poor blind Karim. He just couldn't handle the darkness. I watched, paralyzed, as my best friend and my wife toasted my upcoming death with a glass of my most expensive scotch. They stood less than 3 feet away, mocking my existence, convinced I was a prisoner in a world of black. In that moment, the man I used to be, the man who believed in systems and logic, died. In his place, something much colder was born. I wasn't just a software engineer anymore. I was a ghost in the machine, and I was about to rewrite their entire reality.
To be a successful predator, you must first master the art of being the perfect prey. For the next 48 hours, I gave the performance of a lifetime. I sat in that armchair, a shell of a man, fumbling for my water glass and speaking in a voice that was thin and broken. I let Sarah lead me to the bathroom. I let her stroke my forehead with hands that I knew had just swapped my life-saving medicine for a death sentence. "Here, darling," she would whisper, her voice dripping with artificial honey. "It's time for your pills. They'll help you rest." I would take the capsules from her, my hands trembling with a calculated frailty. But as soon as she turned her back to fetch a glass of water, the pills vanished into a hidden slit I'd cut into the lining of the armchair. I watched her through the gap in my bandages. I watched the subtle, predatory smirk that touched her lips every time she thought I'd swallowed the poison. She was already spending my millions in her head. But while they played their primitive game of betrayal, I was operating in a dimension they couldn't even perceive. Using a bone conduction earpiece hidden under my medical head wrap, I navigated my private servers through voice-activated whisper commands. I wasn't just a blind man sitting in a chair. I was a digital ghost haunting my own home. I began the grand migration. I didn't just move my money, I moved everything. I rerouted the stock liquidation to an anonymous trust in the Cayman Islands. I triggered a forensic audit of our business accounts that would accidentally be delivered to the authorities the following morning. And most importantly, I activated the Overlord protocol on our smart home system. I sat there, silent as a wolf in the tall grass, watching them drink and laugh in my living room, celebrating their victory over a man they thought was already dead. They were so blinded by their own greed that they didn't realize the walls of their fortress were slowly turning into the bars of a cage. I wasn't just planning a divorce, I was planning an execution of their entire way of life.
The setting for the execution was a celebration of life dinner. Sarah, ever the master of optics, decided to host a small, intimate gathering at our penthouse to celebrate my miraculous survival and to show the world how devoted she was to her disabled husband. She invited my parents, her own family, and our top business associates, the very people who would witness her ascension as the grieving, wealthy widow once the overdose took place later that night. The evening was a masterclass in irony. I sat at the head of the table, my eyes still bandaged, playing the role of the frail, broken genius. I listened to our guests praise Sarah's unwavering strength and Mark's loyalty. Mark sat to my right, even leaning in at one point to cut my steak for me, his voice thick with false sympathy. "We're here for you, buddy, whatever you need." "I know, Mark," I whispered, my voice trembling with practiced weakness. "I don't know what I'd do without you and Sarah. You both have opened my eyes to so much."
Around 9 p.m., as the champagne was being poured, I signaled that I wanted to make a toast. The room went silent. Sarah stood beside me, her hand resting on my shoulder in a gesture of fake affection that made my skin crawl. "I have a surprise," I said, projecting my voice so the smart home sensors would pick it up. "Since I lost my sight, I've spent a lot of time in my study using my voice-to-text software to compile a tribute of gratitude. It's a collection of the moments Sarah and Mark have spent caring for me while I was in the dark. I want you all to see the truth of their devotion." Sarah, I heard, stiffen. "Karim, honey, you're exhausted. We don't need to do this now." "I insist," I interrupted, my voice suddenly losing its frailty. "Computer, execute Project Glasshouse, full volume, all screens." The lights in the penthouse dimmed automatically. The massive 98-inch 8K screen in the living room flickered to life. Sarah and Mark likely expected a slideshow of wedding photos or hospital visits. Instead, the first thing that blasted through the high-end surround sound system was the crystal-clear audio of Sarah's voice from 2 nights ago. "The accidental overdose will happen within 48 hours. Poor blind Karim. He just couldn't handle the darkness." The sound of a dropping champagne glass shattered the silence of the room. The trap was sprung.
The screen transitioned from audio to a crystal-clear, high-definition video feed, the one I'd recorded through the microscopic gap in my bandages. There was Mark, his hands on my wife, laughing as they toasted my death with my own 20-year-old scotch. The guests gasped in unison, my mother shrieked, and Sarah's father looked like he'd been struck by lightning. "Karim, stop this! It's a deep fake! You're insane! Your brain is scrambled from the accident!" Sarah screamed, her voice cracking as she lunged for the control panel on the wall. "The system is locked, Sarah," I said. My voice wasn't thin or broken anymore. It was the cold, steady tone I used when I was terminating a failing project. I stood up, my movements fluid and precise. I reached up to my head and began to slowly, deliberately unravel the medical gauze. The room fell into a deathly silence as the white cloth pooled at my feet. I opened my eyes and looked directly into Sarah's wide, terrified gaze. "The vision is fine, Sarah. It's the morality in this house that's gone dark." Karim stepped back, his face turning a sickly shade of gray, nearly tripping over a chair. "Karim, buddy, listen, you're overreacting. We were just joking. It was a dark joke to handle the stress." "A joke?" I stepped toward him, my presence filling the space he'd tried to steal. "Was it a dark joke when you swapped my heart medication for the poison in the kitchen cabinet? Was it a joke when you forged my signature on the power of attorney while I sat 3 feet away?" "Karim, please," Sarah sobbed, falling to her knees and reaching for my hand. "He manipulated me. I was scared and alone. I didn't know what I was doing." "You knew exactly what you were doing when you kissed him in front of your blind husband," I said, pulling my hand away as if her skin was toxic. "You thought I was a piece of furniture. You forgot that furniture doesn't have eyes, but a software engineer, we see every bug in the system. And tonight, I'm finally deleting yours." As I spoke, the elevator doors at the end of the hall opened. 4 uniformed officers stepped out, led by a detective holding a digital evidence bag. I didn't have to say another word. The screen behind me played the loop of their betrayal one more time, a permanent record of their ruin. The fallout was swift and absolute. In a city like Dubai, where reputation and contracts are the pillars of society, there was no mercy for people like Sarah and Mark. The digital evidence I'd gathered was ironclad. Between the audio recordings of their murder plot and the video of their celebration, the prosecution didn't even need a confession. Mark was charged with attempted murder and corporate fraud. His shares in our company were liquidated for pennies on the dollar under the morality clause I'd hidden in our partnership agreement years ago. Sarah, the woman who thought she could gaslight me into a grave, is currently serving a lengthy sentence in a women's correctional facility. She still sends me letters pleading for forgiveness, claiming she was confused. I don't open them. I use them as kindling for the fireplace in my new home. I didn't stay in that penthouse. Despite its beauty, the walls were soaked in the echoes of their whispers. I sold it and moved to a villa where the air is fresh and the only sounds are the waves of the Arabian Gulf. I'm still a software engineer, but I no longer just look for bugs in code. I look for the truth in character. My parents and I are closer than ever, and I've learned that wealth is meaningless if you're sharing it with predators. The greatest irony of my life is that I had to lose my sight to truly see the world. I spent a decade building a digital fortress, never realizing that the greatest threat was already inside the gates. I used to think that seeing was about light hitting the retina, but now I know better. True sight is about intuition, data, and never ignoring that first bug in your gut. They thought they were burying a blind man. They didn't realize I was a seed. I grew in the dark, and I bloomed in the light of their destruction. If you're listening to this and something feels off in your life, don't ignore it. Don't let them call you paranoid. Sometimes you have to close your eyes to finally see the truth.